Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Insignia Lounge and the first of what will be many presentations. We've got so many great lectures during this whole crossing on our way to Los Angeles, and I said if we're going to do it, let's start with a great one. And it's a gentleman that's been with us actually for a couple of months, and I've just never seen such a wealth of knowledge. And Don, I've done your introduction so many times, I should know it by heart now, but I'm going to put it in front of me anyway. His name is Commander Donald Campbell, and Don was a graduate of the United States Coast Guard Academy with a degree in engineering. After a 24-year career in achieving the rank of commander, Don earned his MBA and entered the aerospace and the defense industries, including top-secret clearance for his work with the stealth bomber, the Mars lander, the presidential helicopter, and the Royal Aircraft program in Wales. He's taught at university level, and he's led development teams for large software firms. Don and his wife Susan, you'll see them all around the ship. They're very approachable, very friendly. They've toured the world, visiting over 150 countries, and they've become very popular and highly sought after presenters for Oceania. So always pleased to be able to introduce him. Please join me with a warm welcome for Commander Don Campbell.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hear an echo. Anyway, welcome to this presentation. As Andy said, my name is Don Campbell, and I'm really happy to be here. We've been here since Singapore, and this ship is like a home. Of course, we spend so much time here, it kind of is a home. Anyway, this presentation is going to be on the natural history of Hawaii. In case you don't understand that, those are a bunch of little islands in the northern Pacific, but they're part of a whole series of atolls and volcanic remnants, and there's some kind of coral blocks, if you will, and some large islands that make up all these things that are scattered all across the Pacific, and we're going to talk specifically about just one group. Now, the Hawaiian Islands are located at the very northernmost corner or point, if you will, of the Polynesian Triangle, and that stretches from New Zealand to Easter Island in the south. The Hawaiians, as well as the other Polynesian cultures that we met on our way, also tell a creation story that's very kind of common among all the islands, but a little bit different. They say that the islands were literally pulled up from the sea by their demigod, who was called Maui. Today, geologists have defined the island's origin or birth in a way that I guess kind of mirrors that ancient legend. Most volcanic islands are around the world are found on the very edges of or boundaries of tectonic plates. Those are the big rocks that make up the surface of our Earth. And those include Iceland, and that's what's shown here. It was created when the European and the North American plates were pulling apart, and that created an area in mid-ocean where lava came up from the bottom. And as that lava came up, it just started to build up on the sea floor, and ultimately it created the island. Just so everybody understands, molten rock is called magma when it's deep down in the earth and part of the mantle, and then as it works its way to the surface and becomes more liquid, it's called lava. That's just to kind of confuse people as we go along. Anyway, lava, when it gets to the surface, usually has a temperature somewhere around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But the Hawaiian Islands are formed in mid-plate. They're not out on the edges, they're right in the center of the Pacific plate. And this shown here is a cross-section of the Earth's crust that's around Hawaii. It was created over a hot spot in the Earth. And what a hot spot is a place where in the mantle there's a plume of very hot liquid rock that's pushing up to the top. And as that hot spot has pushed up in that midpoint of the mantle, for maybe 400 million years. Molten lava, actually from the center of the Earth, pushes up against the bottom of the plate. And then as the plate finds a weak spot, it will actually push through the plate, creating a volcano. Because it's oceanic plate for the most part, the volcano starts very bottom of the water, and ultimately will start to build up. But eventually the plate will move on. The hot spot may cool a little bit. There it goes off to the right. Anyway, the activity at the hot spot will cease. And then as the plate moves along, eventually it'll find another hot spot, another weak area over the hot spot will show up, another volcano will occur, and a new island will be formed. Now this hot spot, or this plate, the plate itself is moving slowly to the northwest at the lightning fast speed of about 2 inches a year. It's about as long as your fingernails grow, okay? And then the activity will start again and again and again, and you'll get a whole chain of islands. In the case of the Hawaiian Islands, the oldest are very far to the northwest, and that's seen actually on the left of this particular slide. Over time, the older islands will erode, and eventually they'll become underwater seamounts. Seamount is really just an old volcano that's been worn away and is now below the surface of the ocean. Those are shown here in this kind of a blue line that goes all the way around. Some geologists believe that the Emperor Seamount that's off further to the northwest is really part of the Hawaiian chain. These are what's outlined in what we consider the Hawaiian chain are about 40 to 50 islands, and many of those have disappeared beneath the sea. The oldest above water island down here is about to become a seamount, and that's called French Frigate Shoals. The Coast Guard, in their infinite wisdom back in the 50s and 60s, sent 20 guys a year to spend their summer vacations out there running a Loran station, on a station where you could get water up on a runway just with a big wave. Anyway, Kauai is the most ancient of today's, call it main Hawaiian islands. It was formed about 5 million years ago, and its volcano is now extinct. Oahu is the next oldest island, and its volcanoes are all considered to be inactive, but they are not yet extinct. In other words, they could act up again. Maui is the home to the Haleakala crater, and that also could come back to life, although it's currently dormant. The youngest island is the Big Island of Hawaii, and it has surface lavas that are less than 1 million years old. The Big Island of Hawaii is also the largest of all the islands, and it's one of the few places on Earth where you can safely watch the volcanic processes that shape the Earth as we know it. It has several volcanoes. Kohala and Mauna Kea are considered dormant, again, not extinct, and only 2 are active today, Mauna Loa and Kilauea. Here you can find very slow-moving lava with a fairly predictable path. New acreage is formed when that lava finally makes its way to the edge of the island. The new land may be just a shelf. It may just hang out over the ocean and not be really safe. And access to that new land is prohibited by the National Park Service until it cools and until geologists have an opportunity to walk out there and make it safe for everybody else. Mount Kilauea has very active vents that erupt in various places on the southeastern side of the Big Island. Kilauea is considered to be one of the most active volcanoes on the entire Earth. It has erupted about 30 times in the last 40 years. And actually it continues almost constantly to flow. The Hawaiian Volcanoes National Park sets up marked trails so that you can walk out there and has signs to guide tourists for the best views. Every day, though, the location and activity level of the lava changes, so that park personnel are kept pretty busy making sure that visitors are safe. There's also an active volcano that's located about 20 miles to the southeast of the Big Island of Hawaii. This is a sonar image of that particular underwater mountain. Hasn't broken the surface yet, and it's called Loihi. Loihi will be the site of the next Hawaiian island if the geologic processes continue as they have for hundreds of millions of years. But for those of you that are into the real estate investment game, don't plan on buying any property there just yet, because it may be another 10,000 years or longer before this becomes a habitable island. Geologically, what happens next really shapes the islands. Lava flows through the cracks, vents, and fissures, and it adds to the island's landmass after it's broken the surface. Then rains carried on the trade winds fall on the high ridges and peaks of the volcanoes. Rain is created when that moist, warm air is forced up as it rises over the new land. Even a rise of just a couple of 100 feet is enough to cause a drop in temperature that will create rain. Some of the rain is absorbed into the ground only to come out to the surface later as springs, which lead into streams. Those streams join together with other streams, and they eventually become rivers. And those rivers carve into the rock in a process that's called erosion. Storms that brought the rain also bring a lot of heavy wind, and that adds to the erosion. They carry small pieces of rock and debris through the air that abrades the sides of the cliffs and the mountains. Furthermore, small pieces of that volcanic rock are picked up by the moving water, and that adds to the water's abrasiveness as it goes downhill. Lava fields are formed when the lava oozes its way into the ocean. On the big island of Hawaii, you can walk on the old lava fields that are continuing to cool. I wouldn't recommend walking out there in your bare feet, and rubber sole shoes might not be a good option. There are several features within the lava fields that are pretty much of interest to people. They are, among other things, lava tubes, tree forms, and dragon's teeth. A lava tube is formed when the lava itself hardens on the surface and creates kind of a tunnel, but hot lava still flows through that tunnel. Pretty soon the lava flow will stop, the tunnel will drain, and it will leave behind a pretty nice looking cave. Some of these caves can be as much as 20 feet in diameter, and occasionally the roof of the cave will break and it'll create a thing that geologists call a skylight. There are two types of tree molds as the lava flows around living trees. One, that's the kind that's shown here, happens when the lava flows, but it just passes through a forest. It goes by, it just clings to a few things, but most of it just continues running on into the ocean. That creates a system where hard lava forms around the outside of a tree, the rest of the lava flows away, the tree and the inside burns away, and it leaves a hollow tube standing on the land. The second part is similar to this, but the lava stays deep around the tree. And when you walk along, you can look down into holes in the ground where the tree used to be but burned away. Along the shore where the lava meets the cold water of the ocean are formations that are called dragon's teeth. Kind of looks like my dentures. They're only seen on Maui, by the way, and they were created when the lava reached the ocean. The waters were strong enough, the waves were strong enough to cause the lava to curl up before it could completely cool. And that left these giant, unique, tooth-like structures. Now, what about Hawaii's famous beaches? You know, we have more than one beach on the islands of Hawaii. Sand is formed when the ocean waves pound up onto the beach. White sand across all of the islands in Polynesia was originally coral. Tan sand comes from seashells from other creatures that are broken up in the surf. And of course, black sand was once lava. Over millions of years, weathering and erosion breaks down the lava rock into very fertile soil that's found on the Hawaiian Islands today, and the stuff that isn't fertile washes down and becomes sand on the beaches. There are two types of black sand beaches in Hawaii. One is formed when very hot lava hits very cold ocean water and explodes. That forms a sand-sized little black shards that are very sharp, kind of like broken glass. And there are several of these beaches on the Hawaiian south side, the Big Island's south side. Marine and beach organisms don't usually survive very well here in this kind of sand because it gets very hot in the sunlight at low tide and they can't take the heat. The other black sand is created when volcanic rock is eroded away by flowing water coming down out of the mountains. And there are several of these kind of beaches that are up on the north side of Hawaii. As the rock is carried down to the ocean by that rushing water, it tumbles in the river, breaks up, and forms small pieces of smooth sand. It's not sharp because all of the edges are worn away as it runs down the hill. The rarest of all the sand in Hawaiian Islands is green volcanic, and it takes the prize for the rarest of all of it. Along the southern coast of the Big Island of Hawaii, there's a 49,000-year-old volcanic ring that's actually kind of a dent in the side of the island. And much of the rock there is olivine. And it has been eroding all along the coastline to form the beach at Mahana Bay. Many volcanic eruptions contain olivine. In fact, most of them do. It's just the amount of them that come out from different things. Now, olivine is a glassy-like mineral that forms into a crystal as the lava rises, and very high temperature lava then begins to cool. Because olivine is heavier than most other sand, it stays up on the beaches longer than the other sand washes away into the sea. There are only 3 green sand beaches anywhere in the world. One is here in Hawaii, one is in the Galapagos, and one is in Guam. Long before man arrived in Hawaii, there were the fish, marine mammals, corals, and snails. They were carried here by the currents of the ocean. In the fertile waters surrounding the new lands, there were no natural enemies, and creatures thrived. Soon the fish found the area very abundant with food, and the marine population basically exploded. There were colorful butterfly fish, parrotfish, and of course the bright orange Hawaiian big-eye. I don't know why he got that name. Mackerel, the big-eye scad, ahi tuna, and bonito are caught in Hawaiian waters, and today that makes the Hawaiian Islands some of the most spectacular snorkeling and diving areas in the world. We particularly like the snorkeling off of Maui, and the fish I like here is the moai, or the threadfish. It's a tawny yellow kind of a color, and the moai has these narrow, long stripes that go down the side, and that color changes depending on its surrounding in the waters. They're a shoreline fish, and they get to be maybe 18 inches long for the big ones. Now, in ancient times, the moai were reserved for the chiefs. Commoners were forbidden to eat them. When they were caught in very large numbers, it was considered to be an omen of a pending disaster. That was what the chiefs said anyway, and that was to keep the people from taking the fish, therefore preserving it for consumption by just the chiefs. This little fish, he's not a very big fish, but he probably has one of the longest fish names in the world, huma 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 kuna kuna kupa pawa, or something like that. As you can see, the Hawaiians really have a love for vowels. Anyway, it's the Hawaiian state fish, and it's also called the rectangular triggerfish, a little bit easier to say that one, or the Hawaiian triggerfish. It's a very colorful reef dweller, and it can get to be maybe 8 inches to 10 inches long. It's not a really super big fish. Most of them that you see will be quite a bit smaller. And one of the most prevalent and best eating fish in Hawaii is the mahi-mahi. And I do believe we might have a taste of that tonight. The mahi-mahi, or the common dolphin fish, is a surface dweller. It's found in offshore temperate, tropical, and subtropical waters all around the world. The name mahi-mahi is a Hawaiian name, and it means strong. The pectoral fins of this mahi-mahi are iridescent blue, so they're very easy to see when you catch one. 3 black diagonal stripes appear on each side of this fish, but they only appear as it darts to get its prey. Smaller fish attract the larger marine life and mammals in the form of things like seals, dolphins, porpoises, and of course whales. The giant humpback whales, sea turtles, and tropical marine life are most abundant in the warm crystal blue waters off of Maui. Humpbacks are named for a big arch that's on their back that you can see it when they dive. Hawaiian waters attract thousands of humpback whales from November to April, so we probably won't see any of them while we're there because it's a little late. Those whales migrate here about 3,500 miles every year from their feeding grounds up in Alaska. Humpbacks are drawn to these waters for a couple of reasons. They come to Hawaii to breed, and it's also where their only natural predator is not found. That predator, by the way, is the killer whales, and those are found only in cold water. Ironically, Hawaii's waters contain very few nutrients or foods for these giant creatures, so the adult whales are basically fasting or on a diet the whole time that they're here. Newborn whales don't have a protective layer of blubber, so the warm water is a means for them to survive. It keeps them healthy. Nursing calves, by the way, can digest 50 to 100 gallons of milk a day. That places a very heavy stress on the mother. Hawaii's natural history includes the sea and its bounty that supported the very early Hawaiian people. While men did the offshore and nearshore fishing, it was primarily women and children who combed the shoreline for seafood. They looked to the tidal pools and the shallow shoreline waters for all of their sustenance. Seaweed was an important addition to their diet. Hawaiians valued seaweed not only for its nutritional value, but also because it added a little variety to their other staples. It was harvested by hand and carried in gourds that were containers tied around the women and children's waists. Hawaiians harvested conchs for both their meat and their shells. The shells were used for trumpets, were about 8 to 11 inches long and some 4 inches wide, so a pretty good handful. The long pointed protuberances, usually at the one end, were cut off to form a mouth hole. The shell trumpet could produce a sound that might carry as far as 2 miles. Many people thought they were musical instruments, but they're not. They basically were used to announce the arrival of somebody special or to call people together for a special event. Now, this shows you that Polynesian triangle that I talk about. Anyway, there is geological evidence that the Pacific Ocean islands were all formed independently. There's no commonality between any of the islands. And thus there's a prevailing belief that the animal species found on the islands came from various sources in the western Pacific Rim. They could be from the continental islands, such as New Guinea and so on, or from the continental regions, namely Australia and Southeast Asia. The eastern Pacific animals and humans are thought to have come across from the west using westernmost islands as stepping stones. The first Polynesian people in the Hawaiian Islands anyway, brought many animals with them. They included goats, pigs, cats, dogs, and so on. Many of those animals went feral. The humans also brought about things like deforestation, treeless grasslands, and water and air pollution. As a result, many animal species that depended on forest habitats and for food went extinct. Some have survived into the modern era, and they are still struggling today with extinction. So I'm going to take a look at a few of them. The first avian arrivals may have been seabirds, such as the frigate birds, albatross, and gulls. Later, terrestrial birds, most of them quite small, were likely carried aloft by storm winds and ended up landing on the island. Those could have included things like today's finches, plovers, and honey creepers that exist on the island. But insatiable species, the invasive species that were brought, such as rats and pigs, took a very heavy toll on the native birds. When humans first arrived in Hawaii, there were more than 140 species of native birds. There were 80 species of land birds, 4 species of sea animals, and 29 species of water birds that were considered endemic, and they were found nowhere else in the world. With no predators on the island when the birds first got here, some of the very early birds eventually lost the ability to fly. They preferred to just walk around and see how the islands were. Today, over half of those birds are extinct. 30 of the remaining native species are either endangered or threatened with extinction. The Hawaiian state bird is a goose, known as the nene. It's among the most isolated, sedentary, and threatened of all waterfowl. Hunting, egg collecting, and predation by introduced mongoose, cats, and dogs, as well as rats, contributed to the decline of this species. Current threats also include a scarcity of native food plants and habitat loss. Now, they have started some recovery efforts, and those include captive breeding and release, predator removal, provision of supplemental food, and the restoration of native habitats. Birds carried the first insects to the islands. Hawaii has the most spectacularly evolved native insects on Earth. It's estimated there are about 10,000 native species of bugs. Today, 95% of them are considered endemic. Insects are significant in Hawaiian culture. Some were served as food at the buffet. Dragonfly nymphs were used in rituals, and certain other insects were honored as spirit guardians. The birds often carried seeds in their gut or in their feathers, and as those seeds were dropped on the islands, the diversity of plants expanded. Plant seeds and fruit were also relocated by wind and current across the vast oceans. The coconut palms, for example, most likely arrived as whole coconuts that just washed up on the beach after traveling across the sea in the currents. The volcanic soil on the island is very fertile, and those plants, including the coconuts, reached the island and thrived. When the first Polynesians arrived in Hawaii, they found many edible native plants. Some wild berries were eaten raw, and those included raspberries, which are very prominent here, and the ohelo. Ohelo is really a member of the huckleberry family, and it grows on very low bushes at higher elevations on all the islands. The mountain apple is also another wild fruit that could be eaten raw. The Hawaiians ate the roots and young leaf shoots of the hapa'u and other ferns. It's kind of their own little buffet, if you will. Some of the indigenous plants were usually saved to be eaten only during times of famine or for rituals. And those included, among other things, the morning glory and some varieties of sweet potato and yam. Polynesian settlers set about planting stocks that they brought with them, and those were mostly plants that they had from other islands in French Polynesia. Their favorite was taro. It became a staple in Hawaii diet and was a primary focus of the agriculture here. Once harvested, taro was baked sometimes, eaten whole, or pounded into a paste. In the paste form, it could be kept for an almost unlimited period of time. Water was added to create a wonderful dish that many of you can try called poi. Anybody here had poi before? Isn't it great? You just really want to run back and have some more. Anyway, Hawaiians also ate the taro leaves by themselves, either cooked or raw, and it's basically somewhat like spinach. Pia, or arrowroot, was often planted around the wet banks of the taro patches or in damp inland areas. It was grown for starch. Mature tubers were grated, then soaked in water until the starch all settled out, and that was used as a thickener in all types of puddings. We even use it still today. The islanders first settled, and they brought things like breadfruit, but here it never quite became the preferred dietary mainstay as it did in other parts of the South Pacific. They brought bananas, and they grew as many as 70 different varieties. Some of them they ate raw, and some of them they ate cooked. They brought sugar cane that they planted in clumps or rows or as borders around their taro fields. The sugar cane was chewed for its sweetness. I guess you could call it the closest thing to candy that was in the traditional diet. An unusual fruit found in Hawaii is the noni. I talked about this in one of my earlier talks about Polynesia. Looks a little bit like a soft, lumpy potato. Can be eaten either raw or cooked. Noni fruit is green. It turns yellow and almost white when it ripens. It's used extensively in Hawaii, or was used extensively for medicinal purposes. It was only eaten here as a desperate measure, as it wasn't really very nutritious. I guess it was filling. Now, before you all run out to buy some or to try it, I should tell you it has a very strong smell and a bitter taste. Because of its pungent odor, the local people also know of it as the cheese fruit or the vomit fruit. Makes you want to run out, doesn't it? And of course, what would Hawaii be without its pineapple? Pineapple is really indigenous to South America. It was most likely originated somewhere in southern Brazil or maybe Paraguay. The natives there spread the plant throughout South America. It went up into the Caribbean, Central America, and Mexico. In Mexico, pineapple was cultivated by both the Maya and the Aztecs. Columbus discovered or encountered pineapples in 1493 on the island of Guadeloupe. John Kidwell, back in the turn of the 19th or the 20th century, is credited with the introduction of the pineapple industry to Hawaii. Large-scale pineapple cultivation by U.S. companies based on Hawaii started in about 1900. Among the most famous and influential pineapple industrialists was James Dole. He moved to Hawaii from Massachusetts. Dole and another company called Del Monte started by growing pineapples on the island of Oahu. Dole's Pineapple Company began with just 60 acres of land. It grew into a pretty good-sized company. The Maui Pineapple Company began cultivation over on the island of Maui. In 2006, Del Monte withdrew from pineapple cultivation in Hawaii, moved all of their operations into the Caribbean and South America. In 2000, that left only Dole and the Maui Pineapple Company as the U.S.'s largest growers of pineapples. Hawaii's peak production of pineapple was back in 1975 when they shipped about 900,000 tons of the fruit. Today, Hawaii ships about 180,000 tons of pineapple each year. Now compare that to Costa Rica, Brazil, and the Philippines, who each ship about 2.5 million tons a year. But Hawaiian pineapple is much better. Not mass-produced like that other stuff. Anyway, Polynesian settlers also brought non-food plants, including gourds, wake, and turmeric. Wake is a paper mulberry bush that's used to produce kapa. That's the Hawaiians' bark cloth. Turmeric was actually planted near their houses. They used the underground stems as food during times of famine, and at other times they used the plant to produce a yellow dye. Hawaiians grew a greater and variety and larger number of gourds than anywhere else in the Pacific. They used them for containers and musical instruments. Gourd containers held everything imaginable, from water to fishing line and hooks to food and feathers. The Hawaiians cut and fit 2 gourds together to make percussion instruments. They also used different sizes and shapes to make rattles and whistles. The people carved them into helmet masks. I guess those must have been pretty big gourds. And what would Hawaii be without flowers? The Polynesians brought ginger, a fragrant flower that's used for decoration and for adornment. Other plants that were transported by the Polynesians included the bird of paradise and bougainvillea. The history of lei making in Hawaii begins with the arrival of the Polynesians. Through the South Pacific, Polynesians honored their gods by twining greens and wreaths. Stand up, Susie, show them your wreath. No, you can't, it's dark. Anyway, they adorned their bodies with strings of flowers and vines. In modern times, frangipani are also strung along with orchids. Combination of the frangipanis' delicate white petals with a yellow or orange center and the orchid, I think, is pretty stunning. From about 750 AD into the 1300s, leis throughout all of Polynesia, were very similar. Scent, visual beauty, or healing properties of the plants were very highly prized. Yet some green and flowers could only be enjoyed for a day or two, and then they would wilt. But that didn't prevent the Hawaiians from devoting really a significant effort to gathering the materials that were fashioned into very elaborate leis. There were non-perishable leis that were made from whale or walrus bone, from pupu, which is shells, nuts or feathers. Developed from the earlier Polynesian tooth or bone lei, which was a kind of a hook-shaped pendant that hung around the wearer's neck, and that was hung on a thick coil of braided human hair. Those big pendants were normally about 3 to 5 inches long, and they were very highly prized because they were a sign of strength and royalty, and they were passed on from generation to generation. The tea plant, as well as all types of ferns and other leaves, are used to make a variety of green leis. They don't all have flowers. Tea is found throughout the South Pacific and was used in a multitude of ways. It could be twisted, woven, tied to serve as sandals, raincoats, packages for carrying or cooking, or even plates to eat on. The Hawaiians also believed that the tea plant had healing powers, and they used it for cleansing rituals as well as to ward off evil spirits. The Hawaiian period entered a cultural isolation in 1300 that lasted until about the 1700s. In a lifestyle that fused ritual and nature with every aspect of daily life, leis became a permanent and prevalent ornament. They developed a richer variety of lei here in Hawaii than anywhere else in Polynesia. They were worn during work times, just during the day all the time, and for celebrations as well as for rites and rituals. They were adorned by commoners as well as the chiefs. Leis made from the lehua flower are still placed at the craters in homage to the volcano god Pele. Flowers from a native tree here that grows on all the Hawaiian Islands, but very rarely on other islands. They range in color from white to yellow, pink, or even red. Since ancient times, the association of the color red and the sacredness of it was heard in Hawaiian chants and songs. That included the name chants for all of their chiefs. Today, King Kamehameha has a statue in the center of Honolulu, and it's draped in red and yellow flower capes. You'll hear more about that in my next lecture, which is going to talk about their cultural history. Perhaps the most widely known, I mentioned it briefly earlier, are the blossoms that are used to make those beautiful and very fragrant flower leis that people get at the airports and ports and all those kind of places. The frangipani have a very pleasant aroma. Frangipani is surprisingly long-lasting when it's strung on a lei. In days past, women on the islands wore a single frangipani in their hair as a means of adornment. It was also used to indicate whether or not they were taken. A flower on the left side meant that the woman was married, kind of the way we wear a wedding ring on our left hand. On the right side, it meant that she was available or single. Hawaiians used several methods for stringing and tying the blossoms and greens. They threaded, braided, or wove them together in knotted patterns. They also mounted the flowers on background materials, sometimes just leafy green materials. And for stringing, the dry midrib, the very center of a coconut leaf, was used as a needle. Stringing materials could be the tree bark or a banana fiber, and those materials are still used in a traditional way by many Hawaiians today. Beside the flowers, the fertile soil of Hawaiian Islands supports some of the luscious vegetation on all of the earth. You can go enjoy a lot of these things, the native plants, at the Hawaiian Tropical Botanical Gardens that are on Oahu. Other species are scattered along the roadways and trails, as well as in the parks all across all the islands. And if you want to go see it all, you can take the road to Hana. The Hana Highway, it's over on Maui, is about 64 miles long, about 100 kilometers, if you will, and it takes one way 2.5 hours. So it's not a high-speed highway, and that's assuming that you make no stops to look at the scenery as you're going along. And there are a lot of things like waterfalls and beautiful plants and flowers and cliffs and all that kind of stuff. It also passes over 59 bridges, and 46 of those are one way or one lane, so you may have to wait for traffic coming from the other direction. Many of those concrete and steel bridges were built as far back as 1910, but they're still actually in pretty good shape. They may be a little old, but they're not bad. The Hana Highway is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it twists and turns as it winds through some of the island's most spectacular and beautiful scenery. And actually on that highway, you can see almost everything I talked about today. The plants, the nature, the geology, everything. Nature at work and at its best. Now, I hope you enjoyed this quick look at the Hawaiian Islands' natural history, and we'll take home some really wonderful memories of this beautiful place when you go. Presentation will repeat on Channel 9. And I'm going to go out into Baristas way out by the main dining room or grand dining room if you'd like to talk about this or anything else about this trip or the last 2 trips or 3 trips or whatever we've been on. Susie and I will be out there. We'll answer any questions you may have. And I'm going to allow the cooks, where are they? They're hiding back there somewhere, to set up, because next on the agenda here in the lounge is the chef with his grand cooking demonstration. And then this afternoon here we have 2 more good lectures. Thank you very much. Have a great day.